Close your eyes for a moment and let me take you to a world where distance is measured in hoofbeats, where news travels only as fast as a rider can push a sweating horse, and where a single commander's will can bend entire regions. You have heard the name Timur, Tamerlane in the tongues of the West, but a name alone cannot carry what it meant to march under his banners. If you were there with me, you would not begin with a battlefield. You would begin with the road, the endless ribbon of steppe grass north of the Syria, the dust of the Kishilkum Desert, the cold wind coming down from the Tian Shan. You would smell horse leather, smoke, and fermented mare's milk in the camp at night. You would watch craftsmen in Samarkand raise turquoise domes while, only days away, scouts return with reports of rival princes, rebellious cities, and distant empires that still believed our world had limits. This is not a legend told from a throne room. This is the view from the saddle and the campfire. I will tell you what we saw, how an army feeds itself in lands it has never known, how sieges are built like machines, how fear can be used as carefully as steel, and how the map of Asia and the Middle East changed under our boots. We will ride from Transoxiana to Persia, from the Volga steppe to the gates of Delhi, from the orchards of Damascus to the plain of Ankara, where Timur met the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid. Stay with me through 4 chapters, and you will feel geography the way a soldier feels it, as thirst, as mud, as altitude, as heat, and as the sudden sweetness of a river valley after weeks of sand. You will understand why Samarkand glittered and why so many cities trembled, and you will hear the quiet truth behind the loudest conquests. Empires are built not only by commanders, but by ordinary men who keep riding even when their legs shake. Channel note: if you're enjoying this kind of historically grounded storytelling and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. It genuinely helps us keep making the next episode, and it tells the algorithm you want more journeys like this one. We need your support to keep the series going. Now, saddle up. Let me begin. Chapter 1, Samarkand's Shadow and the First Marches. If you had met me when I was young, you would have seen a man who thought the world ended at the edge of his pasture. I was born in the lands people call Transoxiana, between the Oxus and the Jaxartes, the Amudarya and the Sirdarya, where rivers cut bright green lines through a hard country. Our summers were fierce and dry, our winters sharp enough to split a water skin. We learned early that a good horse is a second heart. I did not join Timur's army because I loved war. I joined because in our time, power was safety, and Timur was the storm gathering over every horizon. He was from the Barlas, a clan shaped by Turkic and Mongol ways, and he understood something many rulers forget. Men do not follow a banner, they follow a promise. The promise was loot, land, and order, an order enforced with a brutal clarity that made even bandits think twice. The first time I saw Samarkand, it looked like a mirage made real. The city sat in the Zarafshan Valley, fed by canals that made orchards and wheat fields bloom where the steppe wanted only dust. Markets smelled of cumin, dried fruit, and fresh-cut timber. Timur wanted the city to be the heart of a new empire, so craftsmen were pulled from conquered lands like threads into a tapestry, masons from Persia, tile makers from Khwarezm, metalworkers from Syria. In the camp outside the walls, life was discipline. The army was organized in tens, hundreds, and thousands, and then into tumens, units meant to move like limbs of a single body. Orders came through horns, flags, and shouted relays. Scouts rode far ahead, mapping water sources and grazing, because hunger can defeat an army faster than any enemy. We carried dried meat and hard bread, and when supplies ran thin, we depended on herds driven with us, or on whatever the land could be made to give. You would notice how much of war happens before the first arrow is loosed. We trained constantly. Archery from the saddle, rapid turns, feigned retreats that were not panic, but choreography. Our bows were short and strong, suited for horseback, and a skilled rider could send a storm of shafts while his horse never broke stride. Heavy cavalry, the men with lamellar armor and long lances, waited like a hammer behind the screens of light horse. Our early marches were close to home, but already wide enough to teach you Timur's scale. We rode through the Kızılkum's red sands, where the wind erased tracks within hours. We crossed the Amudarya at fords known to local guides, the river wide and cold, dragging at the legs of horses like an enemy hand. In oasis towns, elders greeted Timur with gifts and trembling smiles, because they had heard what happened to cities that resisted. The message was simple: surrender and live, or defy and be erased. I remember a siege on the edge of Persia, high walls, stubborn defenders, and the slow patience of engineers. You would hear the rhythm of labor day and night, axes cutting timber, ropes creaking, the thump of earth packed into siege ramps. We raised mantlets to shelter archers, dug trenches to approach the walls, and used sappers to weaken foundations. When the breach finally opened, the battle was brief and chaotic, but the weeks of preparation were the true fight. And when it was over, Timur did what he always did: he counted. Not only prisoners and spoils, but craftsmen. Men who could carve stone, cast bronze, weave silk, or paint scripture were separated and sent east toward Samarkand. It was conquest as supply chain, empire as a machine that pulled talent from one end of the world to the other. Let me show you the human layer under the banners. In winter quarters, we did not sit idle. Horses needed hay and barley, and in bad years, every bundle of fodder was fought over with coin, threats, or favors. Armor was repaired with rawhide and rivets. Arrows were made in batches, shafts straightened over heat, fletching tied tight so it would not tear in rain. A man's bow was almost sacred. You kept it dry. You oiled the horn and sinew, and if it cracked in the cold, you felt as if your own bones had failed. Timur's discipline could be harsh, but it was predictable. Theft within the camp was punished harder than theft from the enemy, because internal rot kills an army. At the same time, courage was noticed. A rider who returned with clear intelligence, a man who held a ladder steady under arrow fire, a scout who found a hidden spring, these were rewarded and remembered. On the road, religion was present but practical. Imams traveled with us. Prayers marked the day, yet most of our oaths were sworn over horses and brotherhood. Timur presented his wars as justice or punishment, depending on what the audience needed to hear. You learned quickly that belief and propaganda were braided like a rope. There is one moment I want you to hold in your mind. We returned to Samarkand after a hard season, and instead of resting, Timur rode through the city with builders at his side. He pointed at empty spaces the way a commander points at a hill on a battlefield. To him, building was another campaign. Stones were the spoils of victory, and every new dome was a message to the world. The center of gravity had moved to Samarkand. So remember this beginning. We were not only raiders, We were the moving edge of a state being forged with equal parts brilliance and brutality. And every time the drums sounded and the standards lifted, you could feel Samarkand's shadow behind us, pulling us outward, demanding more land, more tribute, and more proof that Timur's dream was worth the cost. You would also be surprised by the diversity in our lines. Steppe riders stood beside city men who knew how to handle a crossbow or a shovel, Persians who understood siege mathematics, Turks who sang marching songs, and prisoners pressed into labor. When we camped, it looked like a moving town. Felt yurts for commanders, low tents for common men, corrals ringed with picketed horses, and a constant traffic of messengers. Even the night was organized. Sentries rotated, fires were kept small, and the herds were guarded as carefully as gold. And always, the geography ruled our mood. A high pass could turn a day's march into a week. A river in flood could trap us in hostile country. In summer, the steppe baked and the horizon shimmered. In autumn, rain turned tracks into glue. Timur's genius was to read these constraints and still move faster than his enemies expected. When he ordered us to march, we did not just go forward. We went where the land said we could survive, and we learned to respect the land as much as any human foe. Chapter 2. North to the Steppe, west to Persia. After you have marched a season or two, you stop thinking of home as a place. Home becomes the line of tents, the smell of felt and horse sweat, the weight of your bow on your shoulder. That is how Timur could ask us to ride north toward the lands of the Golden Horde one year and then turn us west into Persia the next. The empire did not have fixed borders. It had momentum. Let me take you first to the steppe, because it is where you learn what distance really means. When we rode beyond the Syria and out into the open grass, the sky felt larger, almost aggressive. There were days with no trees, no hills, no landmarks, except the movement of clouds. You win here by knowing where water is, where grazing is, and where the enemy's herds are moving. Lose track of those three things, and you are defeated before any battle. Our enemy in the north was Toktamish, a Khan of the Golden Horde. Timur had once helped him rise, and then Toktamish turned on him, striking at border towns and caravan routes. On paper, it looked like politics between rulers. On the ground, it looked like burned camps, raided merchants, and the sudden disappearance of safety along the roads. The march itself was an ordeal. We carried extra arrows because resupply on the steppe is uncertain. We drove spare horses so a rider could switch mounts and keep speed. At night, the wind cut through everything, even inside a tent you felt it. You learned to warm your hands without wasting fuel, and to sleep lightly because surprise raids are the steppe's favorite language. When battle came, it was not a single heroic crash, but waves, light horse peppering with arrows, feigned withdrawals to stretch the enemy line, then the heavy riders striking when an opening appeared. In dust and noise, you could lose direction, so you clung to the standard of your unit as if it were a pole in a storm. Timur used scouts and screens to conceal his main force, marching columns apart and then converging so the enemy never knew where the weight would fall. And Timur did not accept an incomplete victory. After the great clashes, he pushed deeper, striking the river towns and trading centers that turned steppe tribute into real wealth. I saw the Volga route and understood that Timur was not only punishing a rival, he was rerouting commerce. When cities like Sarai and Astrakhan were hit, the shock traveled far beyond the steppe. You might wonder how an army crosses rivers that broad. Every campaign carried carpenters and rope makers. We built rafts and pontoon bridges, sometimes using inflated skins, and always with guards watching the far bank. A crossing is when an army is most vulnerable, horses swimming, carts tipping, so Timur treated it like a battle. Scouts seized approaches, archers covered the water, and units crossed in strict order. In 1395, at the Terek River, the fighting reached a kind of climax. The ground was broken by water and marsh, and both sides struggled to keep formation. Timur's commanders emphasized cohesion. Standards stayed close. Messengers rode constantly, and when Toktamish's line began to bend, Timur tightened the net instead of rushing. Retreat routes were cut, and the steppe swallowed the rest. From that wide emptiness, the shift into Persia was like entering a different universe. Instead of open grass, there were walled cities, irrigated fields, and mountains that forced the army into narrow passes. The Zagros Range felt like a stone wall thrown across the map. Roads clung to cliffs, villages hid in valleys where water ran cold and clear. An enemy could be above you unseen, and one blocked pass could choke an entire campaign. In Persia, Timur fought not only armies, but governance. A city could submit in the morning and rebel by nightfall. At Isfahan, after submission, there was uprising against the garrison, and Timur's response was merciless. An example meant to warn every other city. I will not dress it up. Fear was part of the siege engine. Yet you would also notice the administrative side of conquest. Tax collectors followed, recording what was taken. Judges settled disputes so trade could restart. Engineers repaired canals because a functioning oasis is worth more than a burned one. It felt like living inside a contradiction. Terror and bookkeeping moving under the same standards. If you were riding with me then, you would feel your mind changing. You would stop seeing cities as unique places and start seeing them as nodes on a route, a place with grain, with water, with craftsmen, with walls of a certain thickness. That is what long campaigning does. It turns geography into strategy, and it turns ordinary men into witnesses of how power can drag the world's center of gravity from one region to another. I want you to picture the seasonal rhythm, because it shaped everything. In summer, the steppe fed our horses, so we moved fast and far. In winter, we sought sheltered grazing and wood, often in the warmer lowlands near the Caucasus or in Azerbaijan, places like the Karabakh plains where snow was lighter and fodder could be gathered. Winter quarters were never rest. They were planning rooms. Timur summoned commanders, listened to scouts and merchants, and decided which frontier would be struck next. In the Persian cities, siegecraft became its own science. Engineers measured walls, searched for weak ground, and built engines that looked crude until you saw them work. Great wooden frames hurling stones, covered sheds rolling forward so sappers could dig, earthen ramps raised inch by inch under arrow fire. Water was weaponized too, cutting channels, poisoning wells when defenders tried to hold out, or when Timur wanted a city intact, protecting its aqueducts like treasure. And then there were the human negotiations. Not every city was taken by storm. Some opened their gates after Timur promised safety, then delivered hostages, sons of nobles, who would travel with us as living guarantees. Some paid in gold, some in grain, some in skilled hands. You would watch envoys arrive with gifts, their faces carefully calm, while behind them their guards hid their fear. In those meetings, Timur's reputation did half the fighting. The other half was the fact that our scouts had already counted their wells and measured their walls. Chapter 3. Over the Hindu Kush into India's heat. If the steppe teaches you distance, the road to India teaches you altitude and exhaustion. Timur did not march to Delhi because he needed more land close to Samarkand. He marched because India was wealthy, because rival powers sheltered enemies, and because an expedition beyond the known frontiers proved something to allies and rivals alike, that there was nowhere our army could not reach. We left the familiar rivers and moved south toward Balkh and the upper Amu Darya, then into the broken country of Afghanistan. The landscape changed in stages, like turning pages. First the wide valleys with orchards and mud brick villages, then the narrow defiles where cliffs pressed in and a handful of men could hold up an army, then the high passes of the Hindu Kush, where breath itself felt expensive. If you were with me, you would remember the sound of hooves on stone and the way the cold burned inside your lungs. In those mountains, supply was a constant question. There is no grazing above a certain height. There is only rock and thin grass. We drove extra pack animals, and we slaughtered some as we went because meat can walk itself until it cannot. Guides mattered more than gold. A single wrong turn could strand a unit without water. The nights were brutal. Men slept wrapped in felt, boots on, weapons close, because frost and raids are both more dangerous when you are tired. Then, almost abruptly, the world opened into warmer valleys around Kabul and beyond. The air thickened. The dust changed. You started to see different crops, different faces, different rhythms in the markets. From there, we moved through passes toward the Indus Basin, descending from cold stone into heat that made armor feel like a furnace. Rivers that looked like threads on a map became wide, moving walls in front of us. Crossing the Indus was one of those moments where you feel the scale of a campaign in your stomach. The current was strong, and the far bank could have been lined with enemy archers. We built rafts and lashed boats together, and units crossed in strict sequence so the line did not dissolve into panic. Horses hate deep water. You had to speak to them, calm them, sometimes half swim beside them, holding the reins while your bow stayed dry above your head. India itself was not one thing. It was many climates stitched together. In the Punjab, fields stretched wide and flat, and villages stood close enough that smoke from one hearth blended with the next. We met resistance in forts and walled towns, and each siege felt different because the materials were different. More baked brick, less cut stone, more heat, more insects. Timber warps and humidity. Bowstrings behave differently. Even a soldier's skin changes. Wounds that would dry and scab in the steppe could fester in damp air. As we approached Delhi, you would feel a new kind of tension in the ranks. We had heard stories of the city, the old sultanate, its wealth, its temples and mosques, its scholars, its elephants. Yes, elephants, the living towers of war. Many men laughed at the rumors until we saw them. On the day of battle outside Delhi, the enemy placed armored elephants in the front line, with men on their backs like moving fortifications. Horses do not like elephants. The smell, the size, the sound, they can break a mount's nerve in a heartbeat. Timur's answer was practical. He ordered our archers to focus fire, and he used tactics meant to frighten the elephants back into their own line. When the animals turned, they caused chaos. Among the men behind them, that was the moment our cavalry surged. The fight was loud and disorienting, but what stayed with me was not heroism. It was the realization that every exotic weapon is still an animal or a tool, and every tool has a weakness if you are cold enough to look for it. Delhi fell. I will be honest with you, the sack was terrible. It was not a clean conquest. It was a storm released into a crowded city, and once that storm begins, a commander can guide it, but cannot fully control it. Timur took immense wealth and many captives. He also took artisans, as always, stone cutters, metal workers, men who knew how to build in a different style. Some were sent toward Samarkand, because Timur wanted India's skill as much as its gold, and then as quickly as we had arrived, we turned back. That is what people forget about raids and campaigns. The return journey can be harder than the advance, because now you carry weight, loot, prisoners, wounded men, and the land you crossed before has had time to harden against you. On the road north, the heat faded, the air thinned, and the Hindu Kush rose again like a wall. If you were there with me, you would feel the exhaustion of a man who has seen a new world and then is forced to climb back into the old one. Before we reached Delhi, there were weeks of grinding work that rarely enter the songs. We took smaller forts along the route, places like Bhatner and other strongholds that controlled wells and granaries, because you cannot feed an army by hoping the next village will cooperate. Each capture was a calculation. Do we storm quickly and accept losses, or do we invest time in siege works and risk being slowed in hostile country? Timur usually chose speed, but he never ignored logistics. He ordered grain gathered, herds driven, and routes secured so the army did not starve on its own ambition. The river system of northern India is a world of its own. You hear names: Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, Sutlej, and then you realize they are not just lines, they are barriers. Some we forded, some we bridged, and some we skirted for days until we found a place shallow enough for horses. In the evenings, when the air cooled, you could hear frogs and insects singing in the reeds, a sound so foreign to steppe men that it felt almost unreal. Illness was another enemy. In damp heat, men weaken faster. Water that looks clean can turn your stomach into fire. Commanders enforced rules. Boil water when possible, keep latrines downwind, rotate duties so exhausted men did not collapse. Even then, fevers moved through camp. When you listen to stories of conquest, remember that an army is a crowd. Crowds are fragile. On the return, we did not follow the exact same path. Routes shift with seasons, with rebellions, with the rumor of ambush. In the passes, snow could close behind you like a door, and you learned to fear silence more than arrows. By the time we reached the familiar lands near Balkh again, many men had changed in ways they could not name. We had seen India's wealth and its density, and we had learned that Timur's reach was not a metaphor. It was a road we had walked with our own feet. Chapter 4, Syria's stone, Anatolia's plains, and the day at Ankara. By the time the Western campaigns began, you would have stopped counting years the way ordinary people do. You counted them by routes. The year of the long steppe chase, the year of the Indian heat, the year we wintered in Azerbaijan. Timur was aging, but his appetite for motion did not fade. If anything, it sharpened, as if he could feel time pressing behind him. When we marched toward the lands of Syria and Anatolia, the geography became a history book written in stone. We crossed the Iranian plateau again, and then moved into Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates cut green corridors through a dry world. Baghdad's name carried ancient weight, and when it fell in 1401, the lesson was clear. Even cities that had survived countless dynasties were not immune to Timur's method. The river plains were rich, but they were also exposed. Heat haze hovered over canals, and the land offered nowhere to hide a marching army. From there, we pushed toward the Levant. Aleppo was a hard, proud city, its citadel rising like a ship of stone. Damascus, with its gardens and running water, felt almost gentle until the siege tightened. If you were there, you would remember how siege warfare changes a landscape. Orchards cut for timber, fields trampled, canals redirected, walls battered by engines until the city's skyline looks wounded. The defenders fought with courage, but courage does not refill granaries. In the end, what decides a siege is often arithmetic: food, water, and time. And yet, even in these harsh months, you could see why people feared and admired Timur. He punished resistance brutally, yes, but he also played the role of patron. When scholars and artisans were spared, it was not mercy in the modern sense. It was selection. Men with skill were moved east. Libraries were cataloged. Workshops were dismantled and rebuilt in Samarkand. Conquest was still a harvest, and Timur chose which crops to keep. Then came the road into Anatolia, and with it a collision between empires. The Ottomans under Bayezid I had expanded fast, swallowing Turkish beyliks and pressing into Byzantine lands. Many of those displaced rulers appealed to Timur, and Timur saw opportunity. You could feel the political complexity in our camp. Envoys arriving, promises made, maps drawn in dust. Timur's army was not only marching, it was arbitrating who would survive. Anatolia's terrain is deceptive. From a distance it looks like open plateau, but it is folded with ridges, rivers, and patches of scrub that hide movement. Summer there is dry. Water points matter. Timur was obsessive about them. Before Ankara, scouts rode to secure wells and springs because he understood what it means to fight when your throat is already dry. The Battle of Ankara in 1402 is remembered as a single day, but we prepared for it like a siege of the land itself. Timur arranged the army with depth and flexibility, keeping reserves that could respond to surprises. He dug ditches and used the terrain to slow Bayezid's heavy charge. Most importantly, he exploited fault lines inside the Ottoman host. Some of Bayezid's troops were recently absorbed from other Turkish lords, and when they saw their old banners in Timur's camp, loyalties wavered. In the heat of battle, wavering becomes collapse. If you were standing beside me, you would hear the battle as much as see it. The drum beats that kept our units in rhythm, the whistle of arrows, the thunder of hooves. Dust turned men into silhouettes. When the Ottoman charge met prepared ground and arrow fire, its momentum bled away. Then our cavalry wrapped around the flanks. It was less like a heroic duel and more like a trap closing. Bayezid was captured. The camp buzzed with rumors, some true, many invented. What mattered strategically was simple. The Ottoman expansion paused, Anatolia fractured, and Timur demonstrated that even the strongest new power in the West could be forced to kneel. For us soldiers, it meant more marching, securing towns, receiving submissions, watching alliances reshuffle in real time. And then, in one of history's sharp turns, we turned away. Timur did not build a Western capital. he did not stay to rule Anatolia directly. He had already begun thinking of his next horizon, China, where the Ming dynasty stood as a distant challenge, prize. We marched back through familiar lands toward Transoxiana, carrying the weight of another victory. I returned to Samarkand older than I expected to become. The city was more magnificent than when I had left. New domes, wider avenues, more languages in the markets. And yet the campfire stories sounded the same. Men speaking of rivers, of passes, of siege ramps, of the moment a standard falls and the world tilts. Timur would die not long after in 1405 on the road while preparing for that eastern campaign. When the news reached the soldiers, it felt like a wind stopping. Some men celebrated quietly, others feared what would come. I felt something stranger, relief mixed with emptiness. Because when you have lived inside a moving empire, stillness can feel like its own kind of battle. So if you ask me what it would be like to be Timur's soldier, I will tell you this. You would see the world as a chain of landscapes, steppe, desert, mountain, river, city. You would learn that history is not abstract. It is thirst, it is mud, it is the weight of a bow, it is the sound of a gate giving way, and you would understand that the rise of Samarkand was paid for in journeys that never truly ended, even for the men who survived them. On the way to Ankara, we passed through towns that still echo in my memory. At Sivas, deep in central Anatolia, the fortress resisted, and the siege showed Timur's ability to adapt to different styles of defense. Stone walls there were thick, and the land around them was bare, so timber had to be hauled from farther away. Every wagon load became valuable. Later, after Ankara, the army moved toward the Aegean coast, and at Smyrna, held by the Knights of St. John, Timur proved he could take even a fortified port when it mattered. These episodes matter because they show how wide the campaign's geography really was. In a single sequence of months, we went from the orchards of Syria to the basalt and dust of Anatolia, from inland fortresses to a coastal stronghold with salt wind in the air. If you were there, you would feel the empire not as a line on a map, but as a series of footsteps, each one demanding food, water, and obedience from the land beneath it. Otro, if this journey through Timur's campaigns pulled you into that world, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. It's the simplest way to support the next story, and it tells me you want more historical deep dives told from the ground level. Thank you for riding with me, and I'll see you in the next episode.